The HOA's counter letter was 2 pages, certified mail. It said, 20 years of open continuous use, 5 years past the statutory minimum. Prescriptive easement established by operation of law. Acknowledge our rights in writing within 30 days. I read it once. Then I called my attorney. I had bought 1,400 acres outside their development 8 months earlier. Their only bridge, the one 340 households crossed every single day, sat entirely on my land. No county right-of-way, no recorded easement, my name on the deed. When they found out, instead of negotiating, they sent that letter. My attorney said 3 words. The clock never started. The state's Conservation Land Protection Act, Section 84. No prescriptive easement can run against a qualifying conservation land trust during its ownership period. A conservation trust had held my parcel from 2003 to 2024, 21 years. Every year of their claimed use. 0 years of prescriptive right. They needed 15. They had none. The county road authority denied their petition 5 weeks later. The board president resigned the morning the finding posted. The new interim president called my attorney that afternoon. The first thing he said was, "When can we meet?" But before we get into this wild story, let me know where you're watching from today, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Arthur Kell had spent 35 years making measurements that other people's decisions depended on. Not estimates, not approximations, measurements, the kind that went into legal descriptions and deed conveyances, and right-of-way instruments, and boundary dispute resolutions. The kind that, if they were wrong by a foot in the wrong direction, produced litigation that could run for years, and cost more than the land was worth. He had learned early in his career that the value of a survey was not in the technology used to produce it or in the speed with which it was delivered, but in the surveyor's willingness to be completely certain before signing his name to anything. He had built his practice on that willingness and had retired from it 18 months ago with a record that contained no successfully challenged survey, no boundary error that had required correction, and no right-of-way determination that a court had subsequently overturned. He had also spent 35 years reading land records, not as a secondary task performed in support of field work, but as a primary professional discipline, the desk work that made the field work meaningful. A survey was only as accurate as the legal description it was based on, and a legal description was only as reliable as the title chain that supported it. And a title chain required the kind of patient document research that most people found tedious, and that Arthur had always found absorbing, in the way that complex mechanical systems absorbed people who understood how their components fit together. He had read thousands of title chains in 35 years. He knew what a clean chain looked like, and he knew what a problematic chain looked like. And he knew, with the specific knowledge of someone who had seen every variation, what a chain looked like when it contained a gap that nobody had noticed because nobody had been looking carefully enough. The Callow Creek parcel's chain had a gap that was not a gap. It was a deliberate exclusion, documented precisely, that had been sitting in the county's deed records since 1998, and that nobody associated with the Crestline Ridge development had ever read carefully enough to find. Arthur had found it in 2006, not because he was looking for it, but because his field work that year had taken him through the county road corridor adjacent to the parcel, and his professional habit of noting boundary conditions in his field records had produced a notation that he had carried in his survey files for 18 years. Bridge structure at Callow Creek crossing. Parcel boundary runs through creek centerline. Bridge deck and abutments entirely within private parcel. No ROW recorded in County Road Corridor Index. Verify ownership before any county infrastructure designation. He had written that notation on a Tuesday afternoon in October 2006, standing at the bridge's east abutment with his field notebook, and had moved on to the next survey station and had not thought about it again for 11 years. Not until 2017, when a regional land management newsletter had published a summary of the land trust's conservation holdings in the county, and he had seen the Callow Creek parcel listed among them, and had remembered the notation, and had pulled his 2006 field notes from the archive and read it again. He had looked up the land trust's listing in the county's parcel database, and confirmed the ownership, and had noted in the margin of his field notes, in different ink, Land Trust, Conservation Hold, Parcel includes bridge, HOA development on plateau. Check their access instrument. He had checked. There was no access instrument in the county's recorded document index. No easement, no right-of-way grant, no license, nothing. He had written one more notation below the first two. Access by tolerance. Will become access by dispute when ownership changes. He had filed the notes and gone back to his practice, and had thought about the Callow Creek parcel occasionally over the following 7 years. The way you think about a thing you know is still there, unchanged, waiting for the condition that will make it relevant. The condition arrived in March 2024 in the form of a land trust liquidation notice published in the county's legal notices section. The regional land trust was dissolving following the death of its principal donor, whose estate had specified liquidation of all holdings and distribution of proceeds to the donor's named charitable beneficiaries. The Callow Creek parcel was listed as Lot 7 of 11 parcels to be sold at public auction in June 2024. Estimated value based on timber and recreational land comparables, $1.8 million to $2.4 million. Parcel size, 1,400 acres. Parcel description, mixed timber and meadow. Callow Creek riparian corridor, existing bridge structure at northern boundary. Arthur had read the notice twice and called his accountant the same afternoon. He had been retired for 6 months at the time and had the liquidity from the sale of his survey practice, a firm he had built over 20 years and had sold to a regional engineering group for a figure that, combined with his retirement accounts and the paid-off farmhouse where he had lived for 30 years, meant that $2.2 million at auction was a significant expenditure but not an impossible one. He had asked his accountant to model the purchase against his retirement projection. The accountant had come back in 3 days with a spreadsheet and a question. What do you intend to do with 1,400 acres of mixed timber and meadow? Arthur had said, own it, and manage the timber sustainably, and address a title situation that has been unresolved for 20 years. The accountant had said, the title situation, is that a liability or an asset? Arthur had said, it depends on how the adjacent development responds to being informed of it. The accountant had looked at his spreadsheet and said, the purchase is supportable if the timber management generates the projected return. The title situation is outside my modeling parameters. Arthur had said, I know. That's why it's mine to evaluate. He had driven to the parcel 3 times before the auction. Once to walk the northern boundary where the bridge sat, once to assess the timber stand quality on the western slopes, and once to sit at the bridge's east abutment on a clear morning and look at the single-span structure that 63 years of Callow Creek weather had left largely intact. The timber deck had been replaced. He could see from the deck board condition that the replacement had been recent, within the past 5 or 6 years, the wood not yet weathered to the gray patina that the original construction would have carried. The abutments were the original 1961 concrete, sound, but showing the surface weathering of 6 decades of creek moisture. The span was 42 feet. The deck width was 14 feet, sufficient for a single lane of vehicle traffic with minimal shoulder clearance. The load rating sign at the east abutment said 15 tons, which was the original posted rating, and which Arthur's structural assessment, informal, the assessment of a civil engineer looking at a structure rather than conducting a formal inspection, suggested was probably still accurate for the abutments and the primary span members, but which the deck board's replacement suggested someone had been monitoring and maintaining. He had photographed the load rating sign. He had photographed the deck boards. He had photographed the abutments. He had photographed the survey monument at the east abutment's base, his own monument, placed during the 2006 corridor survey, still present and undisturbed 18 years later, and had confirmed its position against his 2006 field notes. Everything was where he had left it. He had bid at the auction by phone, his attorney Frances Odom present at her office in the county seat with the closing documents ready. The bidding had opened at $1.75 million and had run to $2.2 million over 11 rounds, with 2 other bidders, a timber investment group and a conservation buyer who dropped out at $2.1 million. Arthur had gone to $2.2 million on the 11th round, and the room had gone quiet, and the auctioneer had counted, and Arthur had bought 1,400 acres of mixed timber and meadow, and 1 single-span bridge over Callow Creek for $2.2 million, which was $400,000 above the estimate's midpoint, and which he considered a reasonable price for what the parcel contained. Francis had the closing completed in 3 weeks. The deed was recorded under Arthur's name on a Thursday in July 2024. The title chain was clean and unambiguous from the 1961 Timber Company construction to the 2003 Land Trust donation to the 2024 auction sale to Arthur. 4 owners in 63 years, each transfer documented with the precision that a land trust's professional management produced. Each instrument recorded in the county's deed index, without gap or encumbrance. The parcel's legal description included the bridge structure explicitly, as it had in every instrument since the 1998 exclusion from the Plateau parcel sale, including the existing bridge structure and abutments spanning Callow Creek at the northern boundary, together with all appurtenances thereto. Arthur had read that sentence in the closing documents, and noted it the way he noted every legal description element whose significance was non-obvious to a general reader, but precise to someone who understood what appurtenances thereto meant in the context of a bridge spanning a creek that a 340-unit residential development crossed every day to reach its homes. He had driven to the property the following Saturday with his field truck and his survey equipment, and Meg Torse, who had been his field assistant for the last 8 years of his practice, and who had called him 3 months into his retirement to ask if he had any project work she could help with, because the regional engineering group that had bought his firm had reorganized the field team and her position had been eliminated. He had said he had a boundary resurvey project starting in August that would run 6 to 8 weeks. She had said she was available. Meg was 34, a licensed surveyor's assistant with 8 years of field experience and the specific competence that came from working with someone who required precision, and had communicated that requirement consistently for 8 years. She was not verbose in the field. She understood that survey work required concentration, and that concentration required quiet, and she had learned to communicate the information that needed communication, and leave the rest unspoken. She was also, as Arthur had noted over 8 years of field seasons, consistently right about the things she was confident about, and consistently willing to say when she wasn't confident, which was the professional quality he valued most after accuracy itself. They had set the field camp at the parcel's eastern access point, a gravel turnout off the county road below the plateau, on the parcel's side of the creek, with a clear line of sight to the bridge, and enough level ground for the 2 field tents and the equipment trailer. Arthur had a camp stove and a folding table, and a field desk, and the survey equipment, and the 2006 field notes, and the complete parcel records from the closing, organized in the waterproof document case he had used for field work since 1992. On the first morning, Meg had set up the total station at the south end of the bridge, and Arthur had walked the east abutment and confirmed his 2006 monument's position. He had shot the monument's coordinates, compared them to his 2006 recorded position, and found them within 4 millimeters, a confirmation that 18 years of creek flooding and frost cycles and vehicle load had not moved the abutment's base structure measurably. He had noted it in his field log and moved to the next station. They worked the northern boundary first, the creek corridor, the bridge, the abutment footprints, and then moved to the property's western and southern boundaries over the following days. The resurvey was not primarily about finding errors in the prior documentation. It was about producing a current, sealed survey of record that reflected Arthur's ownership, confirmed the parcel's boundaries against the current ground conditions, and documented the bridge structure's position within those boundaries with the precision that a legal dispute, if one developed, would require. Arthur did not expect a legal dispute to be avoidable. He had known since 2006 that the bridge's ownership situation was a conflict, waiting for the condition that would make it relevant. He was now the condition. He was also a retired civil engineer and land surveyor, who had spent 35 years preparing for exactly this kind of documentation work, and he intended to be as prepared as the situation warranted. On the 4th evening, sitting at the field desk with the day's data and a cup of coffee, he had opened the county's public infrastructure database on his laptop and searched for the bridge structure by its county infrastructure identification number, a number he had found in the 2006 corridor survey records, and that should, if the structure had been filed anywhere in the county's infrastructure system, return whatever filings existed under that identifier. It had returned 2 filings. The first was a 2019 maintenance record, deck board replacement, cost $4,200, filed by the Crestline Ridge Homeowners Association under a Community Infrastructure Maintenance category. The second was a 2022 infrastructure improvement application. The HOA had applied for a county infrastructure improvement designation for the bridge as a community asset, listing the structure's estimated replacement value and requesting inclusion in the county's Rural Infrastructure Improvement Program. Arthur had read both filings twice. He had looked at the 2019 maintenance record. The HOA had replaced his bridge's deck boards and filed the work as community infrastructure maintenance. He had looked at the 2022 application. The HOA had applied for a county program that would have put county improvement funds into a privately owned structure that the HOA had listed as a community asset, without checking whether the structure was, in fact, a community asset. He had noted both in his field log and had called Frances Odom. Frances had answered on the third ring. Arthur had read her both filings: the maintenance record, the application, the dates, the cost, the infrastructure category designations. She had listened without interrupting and had said, "They've been treating your property as theirs for at least 5 years. The maintenance work is unauthorized improvement of private property. The 2022 application is a misrepresentation to the county, whether intentional or not." Arthur had said, "The 2022 application, did the county process it?" Frances had said, "I'll check. If it was approved, the county has a problem in its own record." He had said, "It was probably processed without a title check. The county's infrastructure program is designed for public assets. They wouldn't have been looking for a private title issue on a structure someone described as a community asset." Frances had said, "I'll have the full filing history by tomorrow, and I'll start drafting the notice." Arthur had thanked her and ended the call. He had looked at the bridge from the field desk, visible from the camp through the tree line, the deck boards catching the last evening light, the replacement boards Karen had, Sandra's HOA had paid for, the boards that were newer than the rest of the structure, and that would, in Vivian's, in Frances's notice, be described accurately as what they were: unauthorized improvements to private property, installed by a party with no ownership interest and no recorded right to do anything on the structure at all. He had written in his field log, "County filings noted, 2019 maintenance, 2022 improvement application. Frances notified, notice drafting commenced, resurvey. On schedule, completion estimated 10 days. He had closed the field log and looked at the bridge in the last light and thought about the 340 households on the plateau above him, crossing that bridge every morning on their way to the county road, every evening on their way home, in the complete and unexamined confidence of people who had never once considered that the structure carrying them across Callow Creek might belong to someone who had been watching it for 18 years and had just paid $2.2 million to own it formally. The bridge was 42 feet of timber deck and 63-year-old concrete abutments and 14 feet of vehicle clearance, and one sentence in a deed recorded on a Thursday in July 2024 under Arthur Kell's name. He finished his coffee and went to bed. The Crestline Ridge Homeowners Association had been incorporated in 2004, the year the Plateau Development's first phase reached occupancy, 80 units in the initial build, expanding to 220 by 2009, and to the full 340 by 2014, as the developer completed the 3 remaining phases on the plateau's eastern and southern sections. The association's founding documents had been drafted by the developer's council and recorded with the county in March 2004, establishing the standard governance structure for a residential development of this scale: a 5-member board, annual assessments, an architectural review committee, a common area maintenance mandate, and an access road maintenance provision that described the community's single ingress and egress route as a shared infrastructure asset subject to HOA maintenance responsibility. The access road maintenance provision was Article 7 of the Declaration. It was 2 paragraphs. The first paragraph defined the access road as the paved surface running from the county road junction at the plateau's base to the development's main entrance gate at the plateau's edge, including all associated drainage infrastructure, signage, and safety features. The second paragraph assigned maintenance responsibility for that road to the HOA and authorized the board to levy special assessments for major repair or replacement work. The provision had been drafted by a real estate attorney who had reviewed the developer's site plan and the county's road acceptance documents, and had written the definition of the access road based on what the site plan showed. The site plan showed the road. It did not show the bridge as a separate parcel. It showed the bridge as a feature of the road, a crossing, a span, a point in the route's geometry, because the developer's site plan had been drawn without reference to the underlying title chain of the land beneath the bridge, and the attorney who had drafted Article 7 had used the site plan as his reference, without independently verifying that every element of the route was either on HOA land or subject to a recorded right-of-way. The bridge was on the site plan. The bridge was in the route. Therefore, in the attorney's working assumption, the bridge was covered by Article 7. Nobody had checked. The developer had not checked. The attorney had not checked. The county's plan review office had not checked. The 2003 development permit application had been reviewed for site design compliance and stormwater management and access road geometry, and the county reviewer had noted the bridge crossing on the site plan and had confirmed the road geometry met the access standards, and had not pulled the title chain for the parcel the bridge sat on, because that was not part of the plan review's standard scope. The HOA's founding board had not checked. They had received the declaration and the site plan, and the community's physical infrastructure as a package from the developer, and had assumed, as founding boards typically assumed, that the developer's legal counsel had resolved all title questions before conveying the community to its new governance structure. The assumption had been wrong. It had been wrong in 2004, and it had been wrong every year since, through 6 board presidencies, and 20 years of assessments, and 2 phases of development expansion, and 1 deck board replacement, and 1 county infrastructure improvement application. And nobody had found it wrong, because nobody had looked. Sandra Pelch had been elected to the board in 2018, and had assumed the presidency in 2020, after the previous president, a retired accountant named Horace Venn, had declined a 3rd term and endorsed Sandra as his successor at the annual meeting. She had won the presidency with 23 of the 31 votes cast at the meeting, a strong margin for a community of 340 units, reflecting the organizational energy she had demonstrated in her 2 years as the board's Facilities Committee chair. She had spent those 2 years cataloging every piece of infrastructure the HOA maintained, producing a facilities inventory that was, by any reasonable standard, the most thorough document the association had generated since its founding. The facilities inventory covered the community's roads, the common area landscaping, the 2 retention ponds, the entry gate system, the community center building, the trail network on the plateau's western edge, and the bridge. The bridge entry in Sandra's facilities inventory was 2 lines. Callow Creek Bridge, single-lane timber deck span, 42 feet, 14 feet width, 15-ton load rating. Primary access infrastructure. Last inspection, 2017, informal. Maintenance status. Deck board showing wear, recommend replacement within 2 years. She had written that entry in the fall of 2019 and had acted on her own recommendation the same season, contracting a local bridge maintenance company for $4,200 to replace the deck boards she had flagged as worn. The contractor had done the work in 2 days, replaced 40% of the deck surface with pressure-treated lumber, and filed the completion report with Sandra. Sandra had filed the expenditure in the HOA's maintenance records and had submitted the work to the county's rural infrastructure database under the Community Infrastructure Maintenance category, attaching the contractor's completion report and the HOA's facilities inventory entry as supporting documentation. The county's rural infrastructure database had a filing system that required a category designation, a location identifier, and a responsible party. Sandra had entered category, Community Infrastructure Maintenance, location, Callow Creek Bridge, Crestline Ridge HOA Access Road, responsible party, Crestline Ridge Homeowners Association. The database had accepted the filing. No title check was performed. No ownership verification was required by the filing system's intake process. The county's rural infrastructure database was designed to track maintenance activity on known infrastructure, and the filing had been accepted as a maintenance record for a known infrastructure element. The 2022 infrastructure improvement application had followed from the same foundation. Sandra had been president for 2 years by then and had been engaged with the county's rural infrastructure improvement program, a state-funded initiative that provided matching grants to rural communities for infrastructure upgrades. She had attended a county program information session and had returned with the application materials and had spent 3 weeks preparing the HOA's submission. The submission covered 3 infrastructure elements: the access road's paving condition, the entry gate system's electrical components, and the bridge. For the bridge, she had prepared a replacement cost estimate based on the contractor's 2019 per board foot pricing, extrapolated to a full replacement scenario, producing a figure of $340,000 for complete bridge replacement if the structure reached end of service life within 10 years. She had listed this as the bridge's community asset value in the application's infrastructure inventory section. The county's program coordinator had reviewed the application and had found it complete under the program's intake requirements: cost estimates present, infrastructure descriptions present, responsible party identified, community benefit narrative present. The application had been approved for the program's waiting list in December 2022, meaning the HOA was eligible for matching funds when its priority ranking reached the funding threshold. The program coordinator had not checked the bridge's title. The program's intake requirements did not include title verification for applicant-identified community assets. The program had been designed with the assumption that applicants were listing infrastructure they owned or had established rights to, and the intake process had not built in a verification step for that assumption. The approval had gone to Sandra's board address. She had read it, noted the waiting list status, filed it, and moved on to the next item on her agenda. She had mentioned it at the following board meeting as a pending opportunity for infrastructure funding. The board had noted it without discussion. All of this was in the county's public records: the 2019 maintenance filing, the 2022 application, the program coordinator's approval letter, all of it indexed under the Crestline Ridge HOA's name and under the Callow Creek Bridge location identifier. Arthur had found it in 4 searches on the county's public infrastructure database, sitting at his field desk on the 4th evening of the resurvey, with his coffee and his laptop, and 18 years of context that made every line of every document immediately legible in a way that it had not been legible to anyone who had filed it or processed it. He had called Francis at 7:43 p.m. Francis Odom had been in property law for 23 years, the first 6 as a county title examiner, a background that gave her the institutional knowledge of how title chains were supposed to be read and what happened when they weren't. She had a particular professional attention for the category of problem that Arthur had just described to her: the long-term assumption of ownership or use rights over property that belonged to someone else, accumulated through institutional inattention and organizational momentum until the assumption had been operationalized deeply enough that correcting it required dismantling infrastructure, financial, administrative, or physical, that had been built on top of it. She had heard Arthur's summary of both filings and had said, "They've been treating your property as theirs for at least 5 years. The 2019 maintenance work is unauthorized improvement of private property. They retained a contractor, paid the contractor, filed the work as community infrastructure maintenance, and submitted it to the county's database, all on a structure they had no ownership interest in and no recorded right to touch." Arthur had said, "And the 2022 application." She had said, "The 2022 application is a misrepresentation to the county of the bridge's ownership status, whether Sandra Pelch knew it was a misrepresentation or not. She listed your property as a community asset in a grant program application. The county processed it and put the HOA on a waiting list for matching funds that would have paid for improvements to your bridge. That's a problem for the county's program record, and it's a problem for the HOA's legal exposure." Arthur had said, "The county's program coordinator didn't check the title." Francis had said, "No, and the county has its own administrative record issue as a result. I'll look at the program's intake requirements and see whether there's a clerical error finding to be made, the same category as what happened with the development permit in 2004. But the primary issue is straightforward. The HOA has been maintaining and claiming your property as a community asset, and they need to stop, and they need to acknowledge that they had no right to do it." Arthur had said, "The notice." She had said, "I'll draft it this week. I want the resurvey complete first, so we can attach the sealed boundary documentation." "How long?" He had said, 10 days. She had said, I'll have the draft ready when the survey is sealed. One question, do you want to negotiate or litigate? He had said, I want to negotiate from a position where litigation is clearly unnecessary, because my position is completely documented and theirs is completely without foundation. Francis had said, then I'll draft a notice that makes that position visible before the first meeting. He had ended the call and looked at the laptop screen, the 2022 application still open, Sandra Pelch's signature on the responsible party line, the bridge's replacement cost estimate at $340,000, the program coordinator's approval notation at the bottom. He had thought about the 340 households on the plateau, the ones who had voted for Sandra's facilities inventory and her infrastructure improvement initiative, and her organized, energetic presidency, the ones who had no reason to know that their community's single access point rested on a foundation of documentation that nobody had ever checked. He had thought about the morning commute, the daily crossing, the timber deck under 400 vehicles, the creek below, the abutments that he now owned, and that the county's database listed under the Crestline Ridge HOA's maintenance responsibility. He had thought about the load rating sign at the east abutment, the 15-ton rating, his own survey monument at the base of the abutment that had been sitting there since 2006, undisturbed, waiting. He had closed the laptop and looked at the field log and written, HOA maintenance and application records confirmed in county database. Francis notified. Notice drafting. Pending survey completion. Resurvey. Day 4 of estimated 14. Boundary conditions. Consistent with 2006 notes and closing documents. Bridge. Fully within parcel boundaries. No county ROW. No recorded easement. No access instrument of any kind. He had looked at that last line for a moment. The clean negative. The absence of every instrument that would have made the HOA's 20 years of assumption legally defensible. No ROW. No easement. No access instrument of any kind. He had underlined it, which was not his normal field log practice. He underlined it because it was the sentence that everything else pointed toward, and that everything after this point would be organized around. And he wanted it visible at the top of every page he turned to when he sat at this desk for the next 10 days, finishing the survey that would seal the documentation that Francis would attach to the notice that would reach Sandra Pelch's desk on a Tuesday morning and change everything the HOA thought it knew about the road that carried it home. He put down his pen and went to bed. Outside, Callow Creek ran under the bridge in the dark, the way it had run under it since 1961, indifferent to who owned the concrete above it, and carrying nothing downstream but water. Arthur completed the resurvey on a Friday afternoon, 14 days from the first station, the total station broken down and packed, the field notes complete, the data transferred to the office files that Francis would receive with the sealed plat. He had worked the boundary in 4 sections: the northern creek corridor with the bridge, the western timber slope, the southern meadow boundary, and the eastern access section where the parcel's edge ran parallel to the county road for approximately 800 feet before turning north toward the creek. Each section had been shot from multiple control points, the redundancy built in not because he doubted his own work, but because a sealed survey that would be used in a legal proceeding needed the internal consistency that redundant measurement produced, the kind of consistency that a challenge could not find a gap in because there was no gap to find. The bridge section had received the most detailed treatment. He had shot the abutment footprints from 6 control points, the creek center line from 4, and the deck structure's horizontal extent from 3. He had documented the survey monument at the east abutment's base, his own monument from 2006, position confirmed within 4 millimeters of its recorded coordinates, and had placed a new monument at the west abutment's base to establish a 2-point reference line for the bridge structure's position within the parcel. The sealed plat would show the bridge in its complete relationship to the parcel boundaries. Entirely within, the creek center line running below the deck at the parcel's northern edge, the abutments on Arthur's land, the deck on Arthur's land, the approach surfaces on Arthur's land. Nothing crossing the parcel boundary except the creek itself. He had sent the field data to Francis Friday evening with a note, survey complete, sealed plat to follow Monday. Notice can go out Thursday if the draft is ready. Francis had replied within the hour, Draft is ready, waiting for the sealed plat. Thursday works. He had driven home Saturday morning, the first night in his own bed in 2 weeks, the field camp broken down, and the equipment trailer at the survey storage unit, and the field notes in the document case. He had sat at his kitchen table with coffee and the county's parcel database open on his laptop, and had spent an hour confirming that nothing in the public record had changed during his 2 weeks on site. No new filings under the bridge's infrastructure identifier. No new HOA maintenance submissions. No activity of any kind that suggested the HOA had become aware of his presence on the property. They had not. He had been working below the plateau's sightline for 14 days, at the creek level, invisible to anyone on the access road above. The field camp's location on the parcel's eastern access point was not visible from the bridge deck. He had not introduced himself to anyone. He had not been required to. The sealed plat arrived from the drafting service Monday afternoon. Arthur reviewed it against the field notes. Every dimension, every bearing, every coordinate, every monument notation. The plat was clean and complete and showed exactly what the 14 days of field work had established. 1,400 acres, northern boundary running along Callow Creek center line, bridge structure entirely within parcel boundaries, no right-of-way, no easement, no encumbrance of any kind. He signed the seal and sent it to Francis by courier Monday evening. Francis called Tuesday morning to confirm receipt and said the notice would go out Thursday by certified mail, addressed to the Crestline Ridge Homeowners Association's registered agent, to Sandra Pelch at her board president address, and to the HOA's management office. She read Arthur the 4-paragraph summary. The bridge and the land beneath it were private property owned by Arthur Kell, transferred by deed recorded July 2024, title chain unencumbered from 1961 to present. No public right-of-way existed in any county road corridor record or any other recorded instrument. The HOA's 2019 maintenance work had constituted unauthorized improvement of private property, and the notice requested a meeting within 30 days to discuss access arrangements and demanded reimbursement of the $4,200 unauthorized maintenance expenditure within the same period. The sealed survey plat and the deed abstract were attached as exhibits. Arthur said, "Send it." The notice went out Thursday. Sandra Pelch signed for the certified envelope the following Tuesday at the HOA management office. The delivery confirmation time-stamped at 9:41 a.m. She was at her desk reviewing the month's assessment collection status when the office assistant brought the envelope in and set it on her desk with the certified mail slip on top. She opened it and read the first paragraph and set it down. She picked it up and read all 4 paragraphs. She read the attached deed abstract, the title chain, the 2024 transfer to Arthur Kell, the parcel description with the bridge included explicitly. She looked at the sealed survey plat, the bridge's position within the parcel boundaries, the creek center line, the abutment footprints, the survey monuments, Arthur's professional seal in the lower right corner. She read all of it a second time. She read it a third time, more slowly, looking specifically for the element she needed to find, the gap, the error, the instrument she had missed that would show the HOA's access to the bridge was legally grounded. She read the parcel description, looking for an exclusion that might carve the bridge out of Arthur's ownership. She read the title chain, looking for a right-of-way grant she might have missed. She looked at the county road corridor reference in the second paragraph, no public right-of-way in any county road corridor record, and thought about the access road and Article 7 of the Declaration, and the developer's site plan and every assumption that had been built on top of every assumption since 2004. She did not find what she was looking for. There was nothing to find. She called Martin Hess at 10:09. Martin was the HOA's general counsel, a real estate attorney she had worked with for 4 years on covenant enforcement, assessment disputes, and the community center renovation contract. He was competent and careful and had handled every legal matter she had brought him, with the organized efficiency of a practitioner who understood residential HOA law well and who she trusted to tell her what she needed to hear. She told him what she had in her hands. She described the notice, the deed abstract, the sealed survey plat. She read him the parcel description's bridge inclusion language. She said, "I need to know if this is real." Martin said, "Send me everything. I'll call you back." She photographed the notice, the deed abstract, and the survey plat and sent them to Martin's email. She sat at her desk and looked at the wall and waited. Martin called back at 12:22, 1 hour and 40 minutes after she had sent the documents. She had been at her desk for the entire interval, the original documents in front of her, her coffee untouched and cold. He said, "I've reviewed the deed abstract and the survey plat, and I've run the county title chain myself. The title is clean. Arthur Kell owns the bridge. The 1998 exclusion from the plateau parcel sale is documented precisely in the deed. It wasn't an oversight, it was an intentional retention by the timber company. The land trust held it from 2003 to 2024, and the transfer to Kell in July is properly recorded. The parcel description has included the bridge explicitly in every instrument since 1961. Sandra said, "The right-of-way." Martin said, "I checked the County Road Corridor Index, the County Road Authority's acceptance records, and the State Transportation Department's Rural Road Registry. There is no right-of-way recorded for the bridge crossing in any of those systems. No dedication, no acceptance, no license, nothing. The HOA's access road crosses Arthur Kell's private property on a bridge Arthur Kell owns and has always owned, or his predecessors have owned, without any recorded legal right to do so." Sandra said nothing for a moment. Then she said, 20 years. Martin said, 20 years of access by tolerance. The land trust tolerated it. Now the new owner has sent a notice requesting a meeting to discuss access arrangements. That's actually a favorable opening. He's not closing the bridge. He's asking for a meeting. She said, "He wants $4,200 for the deck boards." Martin said, "Yes, and he'll get it, because the HOA authorized maintenance work on private property without authorization, and the cost is documented. That's the smallest number in this situation." She said, "What are our options?" Martin said, "One option. You negotiate a recorded access easement with Arthur Kell's attorney. That's it. There are no other options that end with the HOA's residents being able to reach their homes by their current route." The prescriptive easement question. She said, 20 years of use. Martin said, "I was about to address that. The land trust held the parcel from 2003 to 2024. I need to check the state's prescriptive easement statute against the land trust's conservation status, but my immediate reading is that the trust's ownership period has implications for the prescriptive clock. I'll confirm that and call you back. But regardless of the prescriptive question, my recommendation is that you engage with Kell's attorney immediately and negotiate the easement. The prescriptive argument is a litigation path that costs money and time and ends in the same place if you lose, which based on my initial reading of the title, I think you will." She said, "I need to take this to the board." Martin said, "Of course, but Sandra, the board needs to understand that I am recommending engagement and negotiation. That recommendation is based on my review of the title and the legal framework. Whatever the board decides, I want that recommendation in the meeting record." She said she understood and thanked him, and ended the call. She sat at her desk for 3 minutes, looking at the notice. 4 paragraphs. The sealed survey plat with Arthur's professional seal in the lower right corner. The deed abstract with the bridge and the parcel description, plain as the creek it spanned. She called Phil Garrett, the board's vice president, and said she needed an emergency board session. Phil asked what kind of emergency. She said the kind that affects every resident's ability to get home. She set the notice on her desk and looked at the survey plat one more time. The bridge's footprint inside the parcel boundary line, the creek below it, the county road on the far side, the 340-unit development on the plateau above. One structure, 42 feet of span, one man's name on the deed. She picked up the phone and called the other board members. She did not call Francis Odom. She did not call Arthur Kell. She called the board members and scheduled the emergency session for Thursday evening, and spent the intervening 2 days building the position she intended to present to them, which was not Martin Hess's position, and which she had decided on before she ended the call with Martin, and which would, on Thursday evening, produce the counter letter that Arthur would receive the following Saturday, and read with the complete professional composure of a retired land surveyor, who had been waiting for exactly this response since the day he placed his bid at auction, and who had, in 14 days of field work and 40 years of professional preparation, already built the documentation that would make it irrelevant. The emergency board meeting was held Thursday evening in the community center's main room. the same room Sandra had used for every town hall and annual meeting in 4 years of presidency, the room whose renovation she had managed in 2021, and whose new HVAC system she had negotiated at 14% under the initial contractor bid. She knew the room well. She stood at the front of it now, with the notice on the table beside her, and the 4 other board members in the chairs, arranged in the standard meeting configuration, and said, "I'm going to tell you what we have and what I think we should do about it." She had spent 2 days preparing the presentation. She had read Martin's recommendation 3 times, and had set it aside and had built her position from a different starting point, not from what Martin had said the legal framework supported, but from what she believed the community's 20 years of uninterrupted bridge use meant, and from what she believed a court would do with 20 years of continuous, open, uncontested access by 340 households who had been crossing that bridge every day since the development opened. She had researched prescriptive easement doctrine herself, using the state's online legal resource database, and had found the elements: open use, continuous use, hostile use, meaning use without the owner's permission, and use for the statutory period, which in the state was 15 years. The HOA's use had begun in 2004, when the first residents moved onto the plateau. 20 years, 5 years past the statutory minimum. She presented this to the board with the organized clarity that had characterized every presentation she had made in 4 years. The elements of the prescriptive easement doctrine on the whiteboard, the timeline of community use from 2004 to present, the 2019 maintenance work as evidence of open and continuous use, the 2022 county infrastructure application as further evidence of the community's public treatment of the bridge as a shared asset. She said, "We have 20 years of use. The statute requires 15. We have exceeded the statutory period by 5 years. A prescriptive easement has been established by operation of law regardless of what the deed says about ownership. And Arthur Kell purchased the property subject to that established easement, whether he knew about it or not." Phil Garrett asked, "Did Martin say this was viable?" Sandra said, "Martin's recommendation was to negotiate. I'm presenting an alternative position for the board's consideration. Martin's recommendation was his initial read. The prescriptive easement analysis is a legal question that deserves full examination before we agree to negotiate from a position of weakness." Phil said, "Martin has been our counsel for 4 years. If he's recommending negotiation..." Sandra said, "I'm asking the board to authorize a counter letter asserting the prescriptive easement position before we negotiate. If Kell's attorney can demonstrate the position is wrong, we negotiate. But we start from a position of right, not a position of supplication." The board's treasurer, a woman named Diane Kowalski, said, "What does the counter letter say specifically?" Sandra said, "It asserts the prescriptive easement established by 20 years of open, continuous, hostile, and uninterrupted community use. It demands that Arthur Kell cease any interference with community access to the bridge. It states that the HOA will defend the community's established access rights by all available legal means." Diane said, "And the $4,200. Sandra said, "We dispute the characterization of the maintenance work as unauthorized. The community has been maintaining this bridge as community infrastructure for 5 years. That maintenance is consistent with the prescriptive use that established our easement rights." Phil said, "Sandra, Martin specifically said." Sandra said, "I'm calling for a vote. The board can authorize the counter letter, or it can authorize immediate negotiation. I'm recommending the counter letter as the opening position." The vote was 3-2. Sandra, Diane Kowalski, and a third member named Ray Burkett voted yes. Phil Garrett and the fifth member, a woman named Colette Marsh, voted no. Phil asked that his dissent and his statement that the HOA's own general counsel had recommended negotiation be recorded in the minutes. Sandra said it would be recorded. The minute taker wrote it down. The counter letter went out Friday under Sandra's signature, certified mail to Francis Odom's office address. It was 2 pages. The first page asserted the prescriptive easement, 20 years of open, continuous, hostile, and uninterrupted community use by 340 households, exceeding the state's 15-year statutory period, establishing an easement by operation of law appurtenant to the Crestline Ridge development, and binding on all subsequent owners of the servient parcel, including Arthur Kell. The second page demanded that Arthur Kell cease any interference with the community's established access rights, refrain from any action to obstruct or restrict the bridge crossing, and acknowledge the HOA's prescriptive easement in writing within 30 days. It did not address the $4,200. It did not propose a meeting. It did not mention Martin Hess's recommendation. Arthur received it Saturday morning at his farmhouse, the certified envelope in his mailbox at the end of the county road, the delivery confirmation matching Francis's tracking. He took it inside and opened it at the kitchen table with his coffee, and read it once, which was sufficient. He read the prescriptive easement assertion. He read the 20-year timeline. He read the statutory period citation, 15 years, which the letter cited correctly. He read the demand that he cease interference and acknowledge the HOA's established rights. He called Francis at 9:15. She picked up on the second ring. He said, "The counter letter came this morning. They're asserting prescriptive easement, 20 years of use, 15-year statutory period, easement established by operation of law. They want me to acknowledge it in writing and cease interference." Francis said, "Read me the exact language on the use period." He read it. 20 years of open, continuous, hostile, and uninterrupted community use by residents of the Crestline Ridge development, commencing with the development's initial occupancy in 2004 and continuing to present. Francis was quiet for 3 seconds. Then she said, "They've made this easy." He said, "The land trust." She said, "Yes. Walk me through what you know about the trust's conservation status." He said, "The land trust held the parcel from 2003 to 2024. The trust was a state-registered conservation land trust. I have the trust's IRS determination letter from the closing documents. Non-profit conservation organization. Conservation purpose explicit in the organizing documents. The state's conservation land statute." She said, "Section 84 of the state's Conservation Land Protection Act. A conservation land trust holding property for conservation purposes is immune from prescriptive easement claims for the duration of its ownership. The prescriptive clock cannot run against a conservation land trust. The statutory language is explicit. It was enacted in 1997 specifically to protect conservation land from the kind of incremental encroachment that prescriptive claims represent. The trust held this parcel from 2003 to 2024. 21 years. Every year of the HOA's alleged prescriptive use from 2004 to 2024 occurred during the trust's ownership period. Arthur said, "So the clock never started." Francis said, "The clock never started. The HOA's 20 years of use is 0 years of prescriptive use under the state statute. The claim fails at the first element, not because the use wasn't open or continuous or hostile, but because the owner against whom the use was occurring was immune from prescriptive claims for the entire period. You purchased the parcel from the trust in 2024. You are not a conservation land trust. The prescriptive clock could theoretically start running from your acquisition date," Arthur said, "which was 18 months ago." Francis said, 18 months. They need 15 years from your acquisition date to establish a prescriptive easement against you. The earliest that clock completes is 2039. And they won't get there because we are going to have a recorded easement agreement well before then, on our terms." Arthur said, "The immunity provision, is it cited anywhere in their letter?" She said, "No, they didn't find it. Their prescriptive easement research found the elements and the statutory period and stopped there. They didn't research the ownership chain's implications for the clock's running. A general practitioner doing a quick prescriptive easement analysis might miss the conservation land trust immunity if they weren't specifically looking for it. It's not obscure, it's in the statute, but it requires knowing to look." Arthur said, "Martin Hess would have found it." Francis said, "Martin Hess recommended negotiation. Someone else drafted this letter." Arthur looked at the counter letter's signature block. Sandra Pelch, board president, Crestline Ridge Homeowners Association. No attorney's name on the letter. No law firm letterhead. The letter had been drafted by the board, not by counsel. He said, "Sandra drafted this herself." Francis said, "It appears so," which means Martin's recommendation was overridden, and the board sent a legal position letter without legal review. Arthur said, "How do you want to respond?" Francis said, "I want to respond with a complete legal analysis that makes the land trust immunity visible to every board member, every resident, and Martin Hess simultaneously. I want Sandra's prescriptive easement position to be fully understood by everyone in that community before we negotiate. because the negotiation will go better if the HOA's residents know exactly how strong our position is and exactly how the board's decision to send this letter without council review affected their situation. Arthur said, "The notice at the bridge." She said, "Yes. I want to post the property notice at the bridge's entrance simultaneously with the response letter. Not a closure, a notice. Private property, access by permission, contact for access arrangement inquiries. It's accurate, it's visible, and it makes the ownership question concrete to every resident who crosses that bridge." Arthur said, "I'll post it Monday morning." She said, "I'll have the response letter out Monday afternoon. I'm also calling Martin Hess's office Monday morning, as a professional courtesy, attorney to attorney, to make sure he's aware of the letter that went out under his client's name without his review." Arthur said, "Do that." He ended the call and set the counter letter on the kitchen table next to his coffee. 2 pages, 20 years of use, 15-year statutory period, easement established by operation of law. He looked at the letter with the professional attention of a man who had spent 35 years evaluating easement claims, their elements, their documentation, their legal viability, and who had, in this particular case, been watching this particular parcel for 18 years and had purchased it specifically because he knew what it contained and what the legal framework surrounding it looked like, and what happened when someone asserted a prescriptive claim against a property that had spent 21 of the past 22 years in the ownership of a conservation land trust. He looked at the letter for a moment longer. Then he got up and found a legal pad and wrote at the top of the first page, "Response Framework. Land Trust Immunity, Section 84, Conservation Land Protection Act." Below it, he wrote the elements in sequence. Trust ownership, period, 2003 to 2024. HOA use, period, 2004 to 2024. Overlap complete. Prescriptive clock 0. Below that, he wrote, Arthur acquisition, July 2024. Clock start, July 2024. Statutory completion, July 2039. Current elapsed 18 months. He underlined July 2039. He set the legal pad next to the counter letter and looked at both of them together, the HOA's 2 pages of confident assertion and his 1 page of arithmetic, and thought about Sandra Pelch reading Francis's response letter on whatever day it arrived at the management office, and thought about the 340 households on the plateau reading the property notice at the bridge's east approach on their Monday morning commute, and thought about the conversation that would follow in the community forum, and the town hall Sandra would have to call, and the explanation she would have to give for why the board had sent a letter asserting a legal position that the state's Conservation Land Protection Act had foreclosed before the first word of it was written. He finished his coffee and went to the back of the house and found the laminated notice materials he had prepared before the resurvey. The text Francis had drafted, the laminated backing, the mounting hardware, and set them on the kitchen counter for Monday morning. Outside, the county road ran north toward the plateau and the bridge and Callow Creek and 340 households who had been crossing Arthur's property every day for 20 years and who would, on Monday morning, see for the first time a sign at the bridge's east approach that said what had always been true and what nobody had ever bothered to read in the title chain that would have told them 20 years ago. Francis sent the response letter Monday afternoon, certified mail to Sandra Pelch at the HOA management office, to the HOA's registered agent, and to Martin Hess at his law firm address. The Martin Hess copy was Francis's professional courtesy, attorney to attorney, as she had told Arthur she would do. She had called Martin's office Monday morning before drafting the final version, and had left a message with his assistant. She was responding to a letter sent by the Crestline Ridge HOA board under Sandra Pelch's signature on Friday, asserting a prescriptive easement claim, and she wanted Martin to be aware of the letter's contents before her response arrived, because the contents raised questions about the board's legal review process that Martin might want to address with his client. Martin had called back within the hour and had listened to Francis's summary of the counter letter's prescriptive easement assertion, and had said, after a pause that Francis described to Arthur as the pause of a man who had just confirmed his recommendation had been ignored, that he appreciated the courtesy call and would be reviewing the situation with his client. The response letter was 6 pages. Francis had written it with the structure of a legal memorandum rather than a correspondence letter. Sections, subsections, citation format, exhibit references, because she wanted every board member who read it, and every resident who eventually saw it, to be able to follow the analysis sequentially without legal training and arrive at the same conclusion she had arrived at in 3 seconds when Arthur read her the counter letter's use period language on Saturday morning. The first section addressed the prescriptive easement doctrine's elements as the HOA's counter letter had cited them: open use, continuous use, hostile use, statutory period. Francis confirmed all 4 elements as the counter letter had described them, and stated that the HOA's citation of the doctrine was facially correct in its general formulation. She did this deliberately, establishing that the HOA had identified the right doctrine and the right elements before demonstrating why the doctrine was inapplicable, because a rebuttal that acknowledged the opposing party's correct analysis before dismantling its application was more persuasive than one that attacked the analysis itself. The second section introduced the ownership chain: the parcel's title from 1961 to present, the timber company from 1961 to 2003, the Regional Conservation Land Trust from 2003 to 2024, Arthur Kell from July 2024 to present. Francis cited the deed recording dates and the instrument numbers for each transfer, all publicly searchable in the county's deed index. She attached the deed abstract as Exhibit 1, the same abstract that had been attached to the original notice 2 weeks earlier, now represented in the context of the prescriptive clock analysis. The third section was the Conservation Land Trust immunity provision. Francis cited the state's Conservation Land Protection Act, Section 84, subsection 3, in full. No prescriptive easement, easement by implication, or other non-consensual access right shall be established against any parcel held by a qualifying conservation land trust during the period of the trust's ownership, regardless of the nature, duration, or continuity of use, by any adjacent or accessing party during that period. The prescriptive period shall not run against the qualifying conservation land trust, and no such period running prior to the trust's acquisition shall be tolled or continued against the trust. She cited the statute's 1997 enactment date and its legislative history. The provision had been enacted specifically in response to a series of prescriptive easement claims against conservation lands in the state's northwestern counties, where residential development had incrementally encroached on conserved parcels and then claimed prescriptive rights based on the encroachment. The legislature had closed that pathway explicitly and permanently. She then applied the provision to the HOA's claim in 2 sentences. The Regional Conservation Land Trust had held the Callow Creek parcel from 2003 to 2024, a period of 21 years, during which it qualified as a conservation land trust under the Act's definition. Every year of the HOA's alleged prescriptive use from 2004 to 2024 had occurred during that 21-year ownership period. The prescriptive clock had not run during that period. It had not run at all. The fourth section addressed Arthur's acquisition. He had purchased the parcel from the trust in July 2024. He was not a conservation land trust and was not immune from prescriptive claims. The prescriptive clock could theoretically begin running from his acquisition date. The statutory period was 15 years. The earliest a prescriptive easement could be established against Arthur was July 2039, 13 years from the date of the counter letter. The HOA's current prescriptive easement claim was premature by 13 years, assuming uninterrupted use from July 2024 forward, which the property notice posted at the bridge's entrance that morning had interrupted. Francis noted in a footnote that the posting of a property notice constituted owner objection sufficient to interrupt the prescriptive period under the state's easement law, and that the notice's posting date was documented in Arthur's field log and would be documented in any subsequent proceeding. The fifth section addressed the 2019 maintenance work. The HOA's counter letter had characterized the deckboard replacement as evidence of open and continuous use consistent with the prescriptive claim. Francis recharacterized it as what the legal record showed it was: unauthorized entry onto private property and unauthorized improvement of a privately owned structure by a party with no ownership interest and no recorded right of access. She cited the trespass statute's provision that unauthorized physical modification of private property constituted an aggravated form of trespass beyond simple unauthorized entry. And she noted that the HOA's filing of the maintenance work in the county's infrastructure database under a community infrastructure category had compounded the trespass with a public record misrepresentation of the structure's ownership status. She said the $4,200 reimbursement demand from the original notice remained outstanding and had not been addressed in the HOA's counterletter. The sixth section was the conclusion. The prescriptive easement claim was without legal foundation. The Conservation Land Trust immunity provision foreclosed the claim completely for the 20-year period the HOA had cited. No right-of-way existed in any county record. No easement had been granted. The HOA's residents were accessing Arthur Kell's private property on Arthur Kell's Bridge without legal authorization. The original notice's request for a meeting to discuss access arrangements remained open. Frances said her client was prepared to negotiate a recorded access easement that would provide the community's residents with permanent, legally grounded access rights, but that the negotiation would proceed from the correct legal foundation, which was that the access currently existed by Arthur's tolerance, and not by any right the HOA possessed. 6 pages. Exhibit 1, Deed Abstract. Exhibit 2, Conservation Land Trust IRS Determination Letter from the closing documents. Exhibit 3, County Parcel Database Screenshot showing the Trust's ownership period with the Conservation Land Trust designation visible. Exhibit 4, County Road Corridor Index Search showing no right-of-way. Exhibit 5, Arthur's Sealed Survey Plat. The letter arrived at the HOA management office Wednesday morning. Arthur had posted the notice Monday at 7 a.m., before the commute, before the first vehicles crossed the bridge on their way to work. He had driven to the east abutment with the laminated notice board and the mounting hardware, and had attached it to the abutment's face at eye level from the driver's window, angled so that it was readable from a stopped vehicle at the bridge's approach without requiring the driver to open the door. The notice was clean and direct. Private property, Arthur Kell. Access by permission only. Contact Francis Odom, attorney at law, for access arrangement inquiries. Francis's office phone number below. Nothing else. He had stepped back and looked at it for a moment. The laminated board on the 1961 concrete abutment. His name on the bridge for the first time in the 21 years since the Land Trust had acquired it, and the 63 years since the timber company had built it. Then he had driven back to the field camp, which he had re-established on the parcel's eastern access point, to complete the timber inventory work he had deferred during the boundary survey, and had started his coffee and opened his field notes for the day. The morning commute had found the notice at 7:45. The first vehicle, a white pickup whose driver Arthur could see from the field camp through the tree line, had stopped at the approach, sat for what appeared to be 2 minutes, and then crossed. The second vehicle had done the same. By 8:15, 6 vehicles had stopped, read the notice, and crossed. None had turned back. He had not expected any to. The notice said access by permission, and the permission existed. He had not closed the bridge. He had not threatened to close the bridge. He had posted a notice that accurately described the legal reality of what the bridge was and who owned it, and he had provided a contact for residents who wanted to formalize that reality into a recorded instrument. By noon, the neighborhood forum had 40 posts about the sign. Sandra had been monitoring the forum from the management office. She had read Francis's response letter Wednesday morning, all 6 pages, all 5 exhibits, and had sat with it for 20 minutes before calling an emergency town hall for Thursday evening. She had not called Martin Hess. She had not called Francis Odom. She had called the community forum moderator and posted the town hall notice, and had spent Wednesday afternoon preparing what she intended to say to 200 residents who had seen a private property sign on their only bridge, and who deserved, as she framed it to herself, a clear explanation of the HOA's position and its pursuit of all available legal options. 212 residents attended Thursday evening. The community center's main room held 180 in its standard chair configuration. The overflow stood along the walls and in the entry corridor, the door propped open so the people in the corridor could hear. Sandra stood at the front of the room with the whiteboard and her notes, and the same organized presence she brought to every community meeting. And she looked at the room. 212 people who had driven home across Arthur Kell's Bridge that evening and had seen the private property sign, and who were now looking at her with the specific expression of people who had just discovered that something they relied on every day was not what they had believed it to be. She said, "I want to explain what's happening and what the board is doing about it." She explained the notice, the deed, the ownership claim, Arthur Kell's identity and acquisition. She explained the prescriptive easement position, the 20 years of use, the 15-year statutory period, the HOA's assertion that the easement had been established. She said the HOA was pursuing all legal options available to protect the community's access rights, and that the board had authorized the counter letter asserting those rights. She said the matter was in active legal proceedings, and that she was confident in the HOA's position. A man in the third row, Arthur would later identify him from the meeting's audio recording, which a resident posted to the forum, as a retired tax attorney named Wendell Cross, raised his hand and asked, "Did your attorney review the counter letter before it was sent?" Sandra said, "The board authorized the letter." Wendell said, "Did your attorney review it?" Sandra said, "The board has been in communication with counsel throughout this process." Wendell said, "Did Martin Hess review the counter letter specifically before it was sent? Yes or no?" Sandra said, "The board acted on its best legal judgment." Wendell said, "That's a no." "And did the response letter from Kell's attorney address the prescriptive easement claim?" Sandra said, "We're reviewing the response." Wendell said, "I've read the response. It's been circulating on the forum since this afternoon. The Land Trust Immunity provision in Section 84 of the Conservation Land Protection Act forecloses the entire prescriptive claim. The trust held this parcel for 21 years. Every year of our alleged prescriptive use occurred during the trust's ownership. The clock never started. We have no prescriptive easement. What we have is a bridge we've been crossing for 20 years that belongs to someone else, and that we need to negotiate a recorded easement for, which is what Kell's attorney offered in the original notice 3 weeks ago." The room was quiet for a moment. The specific quiet of 200 people processing the gap between what they had been told and what a section citation made plain. Sandra said, "The board is evaluating all available options." Wendell said, "What options are available that aren't negotiation?" She said, "We are pursuing the County Road Authority petition as an additional track." A woman near the back said, "What does that do?" Sandra said, "We're asking the county to designate the bridge as a public road based on community use." Wendell said, "The same use that the Land Trust Immunity provision forecloses for prescriptive purposes. And the County Road Authority would need to find a legal basis for taking jurisdiction over private property without a right-of-way." "What's that basis?" Sandra said, "That's what the petition will establish." Wendell said, "I'm asking what the legal basis is, not what the petition will try to establish." The room was quiet again. Sandra looked at her notes. She said, "The County Road Authority has jurisdiction over infrastructure that serves a substantial community need." Wendell said, "That's the program rationale, not a taking authority. Does the county have eminent domain authority over private bridges for residential access purposes under the Rural Road Statute?" Sandra said, "We're asking the county to make that determination." Wendell said, "I'll save us the wait. The Rural Road Statute's eminent domain provision applies to road corridors, not to privately owned bridge structures. The county would need to condemn the parcel, pay fair market value, and go through a condemnation proceeding that would take 2 to 3 years and cost the HOA in legal fees regardless of outcome. The original notice offered a meeting to negotiate a recorded easement. Why isn't that where we are right now?" The room produced the sound that rooms produce when 200 people simultaneously arrive at the same question, and the person at the front of the room does not have an answer that addresses it. Sandra said, "The board made a decision to pursue our legal options fully before entering negotiations. I understand the community's concerns, and I want to assure everyone that protecting your access is the board's first priority." She said it with the organized clarity she brought to everything, and it landed with the flatness that organized clarity produces when the room knows the question hasn't been answered. She said the board would provide updates as the legal process developed, and thanked everyone for attending, and said the meeting was adjourned. She drove home across Arthur Kell's bridge, the private property notice visible at the east abutment in her headlights for 3 seconds as she crossed, and she thought about Wendell Cross's question. Why isn't that where we are right now? and did not have an answer for it that she was prepared to say out loud. Arthur read the forum's audio recording transcript the following morning at his field desk, sent to him by Francis, who had written one line above it. "Room did the work for us. Call me when you've read it." He read it. He called her. She said, "Wendell Cross." He said, "Retired tax attorney." She said, "And apparently well read on conservation land law." The room understood the position before Sandra finished the meeting. "We're close." He said, "The county petition." She said, "Let them file it. The county road authority will pull the title chain, and the finding will give us a third-party confirmation of everything we've already established. It's not a threat to our position. It's an opportunity for institutional validation." He said, "How long?" She said, "County road authority review runs 4 to 6 weeks. We'll have the finding before the HOA's legal fees make the negotiation look obviously preferable to anyone still holding Sandra's position." He said, "Understood." He ended the call and looked at the creek through the tree line. Callow Creek running west under the bridge the way it always ran, carrying nothing downstream but water, and the specific indifference of a natural system to the human decisions made above it. He opened his field notes and went back to the timber inventory. Sandra filed the County Road Authority petition on a Monday, 3 weeks after the town hall, 2 weeks after Francis's response letter had circulated on the community forum, and 1 week after Wendell Cross had posted a 4-paragraph summary of the land trust immunity provision to the forum, with a link to the state statute that had generated 340 views in 24 hours, which was approximately 1 view per household, which meant that every family on the plateau had been sent the legal framework that dismantled their board's position by a retired tax attorney who had read a 6-page letter more carefully than the board had. Sandra had filed the petition because she had told the town hall she would file it, and because not filing it would have confirmed, in the community's visible record, that the board had no remaining option it was willing to pursue. The petition was 8 pages, prepared by a land use consultant Sandra had retained after determining that Martin Hess's continued representation was complicated by the fact that he had recommended negotiation, and the board had sent a letter without his review. The consultant's name was Farrow, a former county planning department employee who had spent 12 years processing rural infrastructure applications, and who understood the county's road authority system from the administrative side. Sandra had retained him for his procedural knowledge, not for his legal analysis, and the petition reflected that. It was procedurally complete, the correct forms, the correct filing fee, the correct exhibit format, and legally thin, in the way that a document prepared by a former administrator rather than an attorney was legally thin. It cited community use, community dependency, public necessity, and the county's interest in ensuring access to established residential communities. It did not cite a taking authority. It did not cite a right-of-way statute. It cited the Rural Infrastructure Improvement Program's community benefit criteria, which were grant eligibility standards, not jurisdictional authority. The County Road Authority's senior examiner, a woman named Patricia Wohl, had been reviewing road designation petitions for 11 years. She received the Crestline Ridge petition on a Tuesday and read it through by Thursday and pulled the title chain on Friday. She pulled it the way she pulled every title chain for a road designation petition, through the county's deed index, the road corridor acceptance records, the State Transportation Department's rural road registry, and the county's right-of-way instrument index. She was looking for one of 3 things: a recorded dedication of the bridge parcel to public use, a county acceptance of the bridge as a public road, or a recorded right-of-way over the bridge parcel in favor of the county or the public. Any one of the 3 would give the road authority a foundation for the designation the petition requested. She found none of them. The title chain was 63 years of unbroken private ownership, the timber company's 1961 deed, the 2003 donation to the Conservation Land Trust, the 2024 transfer to Arthur Kell, with no dedication instrument, no acceptance resolution, no right-of-way grant recorded at any point in the chain. She searched the road corridor acceptance records under the bridge's location identifier and found no acceptance resolution for any year from 1961 to present. She searched the right-of-way instrument index under the parcel number and found nothing. She searched the State Transportation Department's Rural Road Registry under the county road junction coordinates and found the county road itself, properly designated, properly accepted, terminating at the county road's edge on the creek's south bank, and nothing beyond it. The bridge was not in the registry. The road on the plateau was not in the registry. Nothing north of the county road junction had ever been designated, accepted, or recorded as a public road. She noted her search results in the petition's review file and wrote the draft finding over the following week. The County Road Authority's director reviewed it, asked 2 clarifying questions about the Conservation Land Trust's ownership period and its relevance to the prescriptive analysis, and signed the final finding on a Thursday, 31 days after the petition's filing, within the Road Authority's standard 30 to 45-day review period. The finding was 4 pages. The first page was the procedural summary, the petition, the filing date, the petitioner, the subject parcel. The second page was the title chain analysis, private ownership from 1961 to present, no dedication, no acceptance, no right-of-way recorded in any county or state instrument at any point in 63 years. The analysis noted that the parcel's ownership history was documented with unusual completeness. The land trust's professional management had produced a title chain with no gaps and no ambiguities, which meant the Road Authority's review had required less reconstruction work than typical private road petitions. The title was simply clean and had been clean for 63 years. The third page was the jurisdictional analysis. The County Road Authority's designation authority derived from the state's Rural Road Statute, which authorized the Road Authority to designate and accept roads that met 3 criteria: public dedication, community use, and county maintenance capacity. The bridge parcel met the community use criterion. 340 households had been crossing it for 20 years, which was not in dispute. It did not meet the public dedication criterion. No dedication had ever been recorded, and the county's maintenance capacity criterion required that the county have a legal basis to maintain the infrastructure, which required either ownership or a recorded right-of-way, neither of which existed. The Road Authority could not designate a road over private property without the owner's consent, a recorded dedication, or a condemnation proceeding. The petition had not requested condemnation and had not provided a legal basis for it under the Rural Road Statute's eminent domain provision, which applied to road corridor acquisitions and not to privately owned bridge structures. The petition was denied. The fourth page was the administrative notation that Francis had anticipated, and that the county's program coordinator had not anticipated when she processed the 2022 infrastructure improvement application. Patricia Wohl had pulled the 2022 application from the county's infrastructure improvement program file during her title chain review. It had appeared in her search under the bridge's location identifier, and had read it and confirmed that the application had listed the Callow Creek Bridge as a community asset owned by the Crestline Ridge HOA. She had compared that designation to the title chain and had found the discrepancy and had noted it in the findings administrative section. The 2022 infrastructure improvement application had been processed and approved for the waiting list based on the applicant's representation of the bridge as a community asset. The title chain established that the bridge was private property at the time of the application and had been private property continuously since 1961. The application's community asset designation was factually incorrect. The county's processing of the application without title verification had been a clerical error. The application's waiting list approval was rescinded, and the program coordinator's office was directed to implement title verification as a standard intake requirement for all future infrastructure improvement applications listing bridge structures or other non-road infrastructure as community assets. The finding was mailed to the HOA's registered agent, to Sandra Pelch, and to Francis Odom. Francis had been copied on all Road Authority correspondence as Arthur's attorney of record. It was also filed in the County Road Authority's public record, accessible through the county's online document system under the petition number. Arthur received his copy on a Saturday. He was at the field desk in the re-established camp, the timber inventory 3/4 complete, the morning clear, and the creek running at its low-season flow below the bridge. He opened the envelope and read the 4 pages and noted the administrative section's clerical error finding and the rescission of the 2022 waiting list approval. He called Francis at 9:45. She picked up immediately. He said, "The finding came this morning. Denial on all grounds. They've also rescinded the 2022 application approval and issued a clerical error finding on the intake process." She said, "Patricia Wole is thorough." He said, "The clerical error finding, that goes in the county's permanent administrative record." She said, "It does. Under the petition number and under the Infrastructure Improvement Programs file. Any future title search that finds the 2022 application also finds the rescission and the clerical error notation. It's clean." He said, "The HOA's position." She said, "The HOA has now received a denial from the County Road Authority confirming that the bridge is private property, that no right-of-way exists, and that the county has no jurisdictional basis to designate it as a public road. The prescriptive easement claim is foreclosed by the land trust immunity provision, which their own town hall audience explained to them 3 weeks ago. Their general counsel recommended negotiation before the counter letter was sent. The county has confirmed the title position independently. There is no remaining legal argument they have not exhausted or that has not been rejected by a competent authority." Arthur said, "Now we negotiate from a position of complete clarity." She said, "Yes, I'm sending Sandra a letter today, 1 paragraph. The road authority finding is attached. The original meeting request is renewed. We're available to meet at her convenience within the next 30 days. If we don't hear from her within 2 weeks, I'm contacting Martin Hess directly and asking him to facilitate." Arthur said, "The community knows where things stand." Francis said, "The forum has been tracking this since the sign went up. When the finding posts to the county's public system, which will be today or Monday, someone will find it and post it within hours. Sandra will be managing that before she manages our letter." Arthur looked at the bridge from the field desk. The morning light on the deck boards, the replacement boards Sandra had authorized in 2019, pressure-treated lumber that had weathered 18 months of creek moisture and vehicle load into the beginning of the gray patina that would eventually match the older boards around them. The boards were good work. The contractor had done the job well. The deck was sound. Arthur had confirmed it in the boundary survey's structural observation notes. No visible deterioration beyond normal weather patina, load-bearing surfaces intact, no deckboard movement under test load. It was a good bridge. It had been carrying people across Callow Creek for 63 years, and it would carry them for 63 more if it was maintained correctly, which it would be, because the easement agreement that Francis was about to negotiate would include a maintenance provision, and the maintenance provision would be structured by a civil engineer who had been assessing bridge structures since before the replacement deck boards had been milled. He said, "Call me when she responds." Francis said, "I will." He ended the call and set the finding on the field desk next to his timber inventory notes and looked at both of them. The county's 4 pages confirming what the title chain had always said, and his own field notes on the 1,400 acres that surrounded the bridge, and that would be here long after the easement negotiation was recorded and the community forum had moved on to other topics. He picked up his field notebook and found his place in the timber inventory and went back to work. Callow Creek ran under the bridge in the morning quiet, the way it had run since the creek was cut by the last glaciation, and the way it would run after everything built above it had returned to the ground. Sandra's resignation arrived by email on a Tuesday morning, 9 days after the County Road Authority's finding had posted to the public record, and 6 hours after the community forum's most commented thread of the year had reached 280 replies, the thread that Wendell Cross had started with a single line. The County Road Authority finding is posted. Read pages 2 through 4. The replies had done the rest. Sandra's email was 4 sentences addressed to the full board. She was resigning the presidency effective immediately. She had served the community to the best of her ability and believed the infrastructure initiative she had pursued had been in the community's genuine interest. She wished the board success in resolving the current access situation. She did not mention Arthur. She did not mention the counter letter sent without council review. She did not mention what Martin Hess had told her 6 weeks ago when she called him back from the management office with the original notice in her hands. Phil Garrett assumed the interim presidency by board vote that afternoon. The same Phil Garrett who had voted no on the counter letter and had asked that his dissent and Martin's recommendation be recorded in the minutes. He called Francis Odom at 4:15. Frances had been expecting the call. She had told Arthur on Monday that Sandra's position had become untenable after the forum thread, and that the board would move within the week. Arthur had said, "Whenever they're ready." Phil introduced himself and said, "We'd like to meet." Frances said, "Thursday works." Phil said, "Thursday works." The meeting was at Frances's office. Phil Garrett and Colette Marsh, the two board members who had voted no on the counter letter, representing the HOA, with Martin Hess present as their counsel. Arthur attended with Frances. The room was professional and without residual antagonism, which was the atmosphere that resulted when the people at the table were the ones who had wanted to be there from the beginning, and the obstacle to being there had resigned. Martin Hess and Frances had spoken twice by phone before the meeting. The professional courtesy framework Frances had established with the courtesy call 6 weeks earlier, producing the working relationship that the negotiation required. They had exchanged preliminary term frameworks before Thursday and had narrowed the significant questions to two: the annual easement fee structure and the maintenance plan's county approval requirement. By Thursday, both questions had answers that both sides found acceptable. The negotiation took 4 hours. Frances had structured the easement terms in the sequence that produced the fewest reopened questions. The permanent right-of-way first, because it was the term the HOA needed most, and establishing it early set the cooperative tone for everything that followed. The permanent recorded right-of-way was the easement's foundation, a non-exclusive right of residential access across the bridge for the benefit of the Crestline Ridge Development's 340 units and their successors in interest, appurtenant to the development's parcels and running with the land. The right-of-way was for residential access only: personal vehicles, emergency vehicles, service and delivery vehicles serving the residential units. It was not a commercial right-of-way and did not extend to any commercial use of the plateau. It was permanent, no sunset provision, no renewal requirement, and was recorded as a burden on Arthur's parcel and a benefit on the development's parcels in the county's deed index, meaning it would appear in every future title search on every lot in the development and on Arthur's parcel simultaneously. The annual easement maintenance fee was $8,400, a figure Frances had derived from the bridge's annual maintenance cost estimate, which Arthur had produced from his structural observation notes and his 35 years of infrastructure assessment experience, divided between the parties at a ratio that reflected the development's primary use of the structure. The HOA paid $8,400 annually to Arthur, indexed to the county's infrastructure cost index, reviewed every 5 years. The fee was modest relative to the 340-unit assessment base, less than $25 per household per year, and was structured as an easement maintenance contribution rather than a use fee, which meant it was legally characterized as the HOA's contribution to the upkeep of infrastructure it had a recorded right to use, rather than as payment for permission to cross. The HOA was responsible for all bridge maintenance under a county-approved maintenance plan, a plan that Arthur would prepare and submit to the county's road authority for approval, drawing on his engineering background and Vivian Cross's structural assessment standards from his survey work. The plan would specify inspection intervals, maintenance triggers, deck replacement criteria, and load rating review periods. The county's approval requirement meant the maintenance standard was set by a public authority rather than by private negotiation, which protected both parties: the HOA against inadequate maintenance standards, and Arthur against claims that he had failed to maintain infrastructure the HOA depended on. The $4,200 reimbursement for the 2019 deck board replacement was paid at closing, a check from the HOA's Maintenance Reserve Fund, which Phil had confirmed was adequate for the payment without requiring a special assessment. Frances accepted it as settlement of the unauthorized improvement claim in full. The recorded acknowledgement was the final term, and the one Frances had been most precise about drafting. It was a single recorded instrument, not a provision within the easement agreement, but a separate document filed independently in the county's deed index, stating that the Callow Creek Bridge was the private property of Arthur Kell, that the Crestline Ridge Homeowners Association held no ownership interest in the bridge, and had held no ownership interest at any prior time, that the community's access to the bridge existed by virtue of the recorded easement granted by Arthur Kell in the current instrument, and that the access existed by grant and not by right. The distinction between by grant and by right was the sentence Francis had insisted on, and that Martin had accepted after one exchange. It foreclosed any future board from characterizing the easement as a recognition of pre-existing rights rather than a new grant, which meant no future board could build a prescriptive argument on the easement's existence. Martin had said, "That's a clean distinction." Francis had said, "That's the point." Arthur signed the easement agreement and the recorded acknowledgement on a Thursday afternoon at the county recorder's office, the same Thursday as the meeting, because Francis had prepared the final instruments in advance of terms being confirmed and had brought them to the meeting, ready for execution, once agreement was reached. The county recorder filed them at 4:47 p.m. The easement appeared in the county's online deed index by end of business, accessible under Arthur's parcel number, under the development's parcel number, and under the bridge's location identifier in the infrastructure database, where the 2022 application's rescission notation and the clerical error finding already sat in the permanent record. Arthur drove to the bridge Friday morning before the commute. He had the engraved marker in the truck's bed, a 4-inch by 12-inch plate of brushed aluminum with black-filled engraved text, mounted on a stainless steel backing plate sized for the east abutment's face. He had ordered it from a monument fabrication shop the week after the county finding had posted, on the reasonable expectation that the negotiation would conclude, and that the conclusion would require a marker. He mounted it at the east abutment's face, below the load rating sign and above his 2006 survey monument, at eye level from the bridge approach. The text was direct: Callow Creek Bridge, private property of Arthur Kell, community access by recorded easement, 2025. He stepped back and looked at it in the early morning light. The 1961 concrete abutment, his 2006 survey monument at the base, the load rating sign above, the new marker between them, the engraved text catching the low morning light the way engraved metal caught light, the letters visible from the bridge approach in the specific clear way that permanent records were visible when they were made of the right material and mounted at the right height. He removed the laminated property notice that had been mounted at the abutment since Monday, 7 weeks earlier. The laminated board had done its work. It had been the first visible evidence to 340 households that the bridge's ownership was not what they had assumed, and it had been present through the town hall and the county petition and the road authority finding and the resignation and the negotiation. He took it down and put it in the truck. He stood at the abutment for a moment and looked at the bridge, the 42 feet of span, the replacement deck boards weathering toward the gray of the original structure, the creek running below at its late-season flow, the county road on the far bank, the plateau above with its 340 households, beginning the morning routines that would send them across this bridge in the next hour on their way to work. He looked at the marker. He looked at his survey monument at the abutment's base, placed in October 2006, present for 19 years, the point from which he had shot the bridge's position in the boundary survey that had sealed the documentation that had supported everything that followed. He got back in the truck and drove to the field camp. Meg was already at the total station when he arrived, the morning's first setup complete, the instrument level and ready. She looked up and said, "How's the marker?" He said, "Good placement, readable from the approach." She said, "Did you take the laminated one down?" He said, "It's in the truck." She said, "Ready when you are." He poured his coffee from the thermos, opened the field notebook to the timber inventory's current section, and picked up the rod. The inventory had 12 sections remaining: the northern meadow corridor and the creekside timber stand on the western slope. The last 2 areas of the 1,400 acres he had not yet measured and documented in the systematic sequence that his fieldwork always followed. He called the first shot, and Meg read the instrument, and he wrote the number in the field notebook the way he had written field numbers for 35 years. Precisely, in the column where it belonged, as part of a record that would still be accurate when everyone who had been present for its creation was gone. The bridge carried the morning commute across Callow Creek behind him, the way it had carried it for 63 years. The deck boards took the load, and the abutments held the span, and the creek ran below it indifferent to the marker on the east face, and the easement in the county's deed index, and the 19 years of survey monuments at the abutment's base. The difference was recorded. That was sufficient.